talking about this in our faculty meeting last week, that that's how you can kind of sell it. Now, can you take advantage of that if you don't really like this material, and you can say, hey, yeah, I survived that course, but can you really, you probably don't want to promote it too much on your resume if that's not really your forte. But if nothing else, students come away with more Excel skills than someone like my son at Michigan State, where they don't have to take a course like this. I don't know if I should say that to students. They feel like, why do we have to take this class? But I do tell them, hey, you're getting a lot more Excel skill work than, say, my son is at Michigan State. My other son, by the way, is here in sophomore in the College of Business here at BGSU. So this is a t-shirt that I used to wear. I don't show this to students all the time, but this is a t-shirt that we used to have from my graduate program at North Carolina. Management science. It's a scientific approach to problem solving for executive management, which that's kind of the straightforward, somewhat serious definition. But then the second one says applying mathematically rigorous techniques to verify the obvious, which we always kind of felt like that was a lot of what we were doing in class, and creating these mathematical models that maybe aren't very realistic. So decision-making measures seldom used in the real world, and providing ingenious solutions to irrelevant problems. So I don't usually try to show this to undergrads, because then you're just enforcing the belief that this is all useless stuff. One of my students back in the aughts used to, on his homework, well, one time on his homework, wrote out BS for the title of his homework. And I didn't take offense to it. I was grading homeworks in the summertime. I was like, okay, this student really doesn't care for this course. Strange thing, a couple years later though, at the graduation ceremony, he came up and shook my hand. So I was like, okay, maybe he got over it. So he learned that maybe there is something to this class. I don't know. Relevant problems. When I'm talking about production scheduling, I usually focus on Ada, Ohio here, where the Wilson Football Factory is. There's lots of videos that you can show students about that operation. So I usually start off that class trying to do a production and inventory modeling down there in the Wilson Football Factory. Occasionally I'll talk about candy cane production at the Dum Dum Factory. I guess, what's that called? Spangler Candy out there in Bryan. I always talk about a supply chain logistics idea that I saw in the newspaper, where they are consolidating their operations for the Heinz production of ketchup. It's now all done in Fremont, Ohio, which people around here probably don't know, but used to have plants in Michigan and California and so forth. And now you just have railway trucking in big hot tub vats of ketchup paste that's cooked up in Fremont. So I always thought that's kind of interesting to show students, hey, right around you is real life stuff. Even here in Perrysburg, we have a glass factory, glass production. That's the headquarters, but there's glass factories across the world. And so I talk about that occasionally in class as well. Trying to keep it real, like I was talking about earlier with Donna. So most of you guys know what business analytics is, but the students certainly don't. And so I tell them it's kind of a mixture of your 4 favorite classes: mathematics, statistics, economics, and then computers. Maybe they haven't taken computer science, but it sure feels like one, especially the first half of this course is using the so-called solver inside Excel. And the problem with that is it solves your problems, but if you misspecify, it's kind of like writing computer code. You get lots of errors and bugs, and that's the frustration. You just get error messages and you can't figure out why it's not working. So the students come in with some trepidation because these are usually not their favorite subjects, right? Unless they're an analytics major. So I am always trying to inspire them by telling them that this stuff is actually useful. It's a course basically on word problems. And for me, that was my favorite subject in high school, but for most people, that's their least favorite subject. So it's a hard sell, trying to motivate them all throughout the semester. You don't want to do too much of that though. Too much of just talking about how useful this stuff is doesn't really say, well, how can I pass your exam? So that's the main focus of the students. So I try to do some of this motivation for lifelong learning with some, with some limitations. You can't do too much of that. I did have some course eval once where I was linking together various courses they're taking in the college, right? Especially statistics and the connection to this course BA 3800. And I did a little too much of that when I was teaching this elementary statistics class a few years ago. The students were like, you keep talking about this other class. Tell us what this class is about. So I was trying to make connections. Hey, you're learning the normal distribution. We're going to use that to actually model. That's what I'm doing here in about half an hour. Model the demand for an airline flight. So I always try to make connections between courses. I always feel like I'm kind of a synthesizer that can kind of make those connections, bring disparate ideas together and try to see the bigger picture. But again, you got to do that with some limitations. Can't spend the whole time talking about that. So this is a slide I've shown students before that to kind of motivate data mining. So I probably stole this from my data mining lectures, trying to find those golden nuggets within some data, trying to make some decisions. It's really a course about making decisions. I try to emphasize to students, hey, this course isn't a word problem class where you're just solving it and finding an answer. You're building a tool for exploration, trying to search for those gold nuggets. And so it's not just about getting the answer to a problem. We're really building a model and variations on that model. So I'm going to show you guys some projects that I've done. The pertinent one this week is March Madness. So I was going to show you guys a March Madness solver here in a bit. So half the course is optimization with solver, and that's where I use the solver to solve my March Madness brackets. The problem with that is that's the first half of the semester, and we finished that topic, had an exam on that topic like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Even when the semester is delayed to start in late January, like last spring, we were finishing optimization like the first week of March, and March Madness starts kind of in the second week of March. So it's a little bit, I guess in some sense, it's maybe good timing. You've now learned about what solver is, and you can actually go and solve that bracket with this solver that I've given you. So that's the first half of the course. That's probably the hardest half of the course. It used to be more than that just because it's so hard. We'd spend a lot more time just showing lots of examples. When we switched to BA 3800 a couple years ago, we trimmed some of that material, trying to make room for this data mining content that we're squeezing in now. In fact, I used to have students do projects in the last half of the semester. After they learned optimization, hey, go apply it to your own ideas, come up with your own ideas. And I've had some good ones over the years, but now it just seems like there's no time for that. We're trying to squeeze in this other topic. I used to have just, the last part of the semester, last month or so, to talk about simulation and decision trees, which is the easier stuff that we're doing now, and less homeworks. And so with that more freed up time, I used to have students do projects. Now I feel like there's no time for that. That's one of the, I guess, unintended consequences of trying to squeeze in new material into a course that's already difficult. I was never really in favor of that, but I guess I'll get off my soapbox and teach it. So here's really what I want to talk about today is like the various ways I try to motivate this course throughout the semester, especially in the first day of class, but books, but also magazine articles I see, news articles that I see in newspapers or even on the TV, some videos I found, not just the Wilson Football Factory, but other more pertinent ones to this analytics topic. And then I also want to kind of close with some projects to show you that I sprinkle into the course. So I'll start with the books. I'm always reading lots of books, and so I know a lot of students probably don't read or have time to read, but this is my lifelong learning. So eventually, you maybe, hopefully, will read more in your later years. I know as a student myself, I didn't read anything that I didn't have to read, and so when I tell students I, read a book last week, they're like, "Oh, I never read any books." But I think that can change over time. So I'm always trying to inspire them and trying to tell them what I've learned from those readings. This is a favorite book that's like 2 or 3 page chapters. And so I always tell students, it's a great book to read. It's all about this course, basically, applied to finance. 2 or 3 pages, just enough to put you to sleep at night. So if you're having insomnia, it's a great book to pick up. And it has this diagram that I use to start the discussion of decision trees, trying to teach them that we're following a good process. You may get a bad outcome anyway, so you can't control when it's random what may happen to you. There's some quotes from football coaches that I found in Sports Illustrated a couple of summers ago. I put that in my Canvas module to kind of motivate this in the context of coaching. One of the coaches said, as long as it works, it was a good decision. And I'm like, well, that can be just dumb luck. And the good coaches usually aren't hoping for lucky breaks. So I like this picture, tries to motivate this idea that we're trying to teach students to kind of think critically and quantitatively, follow a good process, kind of like an engineering process, and not just rely on your gut and gut instincts. And trying to teach people to be econs as opposed to being humans, or at least realize that you're human and you have some irrationality sometimes in the decision making. So trying to teach them good decision making processes. This is another favorite book. I just talked about this one last week, and I mentioned to my students, I probably shouldn't have mentioned, but Dean Rogers at the time, now President Rogers, took this book and never returned it. So I bought another copy. So I have that one of my favorite books from the aughts there. I was talking about the flaw of averages last week as well. So I'm always trying to pull in at least pictures and can refer to the book where I got the picture, just to kind of inspire students to maybe go out and see things that they can learn. And this is a slide that I added just last week because I'm currently reading this book. Another one with 2 to 3 page chapters, which I like. I mean, it can just get you into reading and fall back asleep. Anyway. The videos, I usually show 2 videos in the first day of class, so let me talk about both of those. The first here is on analytics. I don't show the whole video, but these links, these videos are linked in my Canvas page, either in the first part of the Canvas before we start the content of the course. There's some motivational pages there, as well as maybe when I'm trying to introduce a new topic. So usually I'll wait to talk about this baseball scheduling one when we start talking about integer programming, which is about 3 or 4 weeks into the semester. But this one I always show in the first day of class, I guess the TED Talk that Mike Hoskins gave here. I just noticed that's a misspelling. Hoskins, right? I just noticed that. I've been showing this video for 10 years. If you click on this link, I think it should work. Should be some sound here, right?
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Hoskins. It's a special joy for me to be here with you today. As you may have heard, I graduated from BG. It's a bit deeper than that. I grew up in Bowling Green, went to high school here and college here. My dad was a professor on the faculty here in the College of Business for over 20 years. So I've got a special affection for Bowling Green. It's always nice to come back. And frankly, over the last couple of years, amazing to come back.
So I usually skip right to this point here.
So analytics is something you'll often hear together with big data. And I predict this will hit all of them. Big data, analytics. But if humans can't do it, how are we going to do it? We're going to do it with machine learning techniques. And I hazard a guess.
So I always stop on this slide because it blinks away in about 1 more second. But these are like all the topics. Optimization, that's what this course is all about. Prescriptive analytics, trying to prescribe the way the world should be, but a lot of this is more predictive analytics, right? Like regression, like they see in their BA 2120 class. They don't always have that class coming into this course. It's not a prereq, but they've certainly had at least 1 course in statistics, and we're gonna talk about simulation. There's a time series course they can take if they're really interested, the 4,000 level class, and we even talk briefly about genetic algorithms, mating together solutions for an optimization problem to create offspring, and survival of the fittest, the weak solutions die out and the other ones propagate to the next generation and all that. So we talked now about data mining, so classification, clustering. So a lot of these buzzwords that it's good at least the students have heard. This is, I guess, the new sexy statistics, as Mike Hoskins says in this video. Somewhere in this video it says this is the new sexy statistics.
That most of you are very unfamiliar with the terms on here. They've been largely the province of special scientists. Bowling Green has a renowned program in advanced statistics in a couple of colleges here. If those folks are in the room, they understand these words very well.
I was in the room, up in the balcony.
This is the emerging science that's going to be important. If these are huge mountains of data, and they have gold veins in there, they have incredible information, but we have to mine that data out of there. In fact, that science is called data mining. Then yeah, we're going to have to do some kind of new deep analytics on these big data mountains. Why do we do it? One is to augment reality and improve decision making. I think most of you know applications like Shazam and Google Docs.
So I usually cut it off about there, so get to the Shazam part of it at least, and then can talk about data mining later in the semester, so it kind of motivates that. This other video is one I usually show again like 3 weeks in the semester when we start talking about integer decision making. A lot of binary decision making, which is in practice a lot of the optimization modeling. You're just trying to say yes or no. Do I want to plant here in Perrysburg, or should I put it in Bowling Green or Fremont? So a lot of yes/no type binary decisions. They see dummy variables in the regression class. So it's kind of related. So there you have a binary indicator for some categorical variables. I try to remind them stuff like that they already know, but now we're making a decision that's binary. So we have that kind of binary decision making that takes place like in this case. So sometimes I even show this in the first day just to try to, a lot of people like sports, so at least, can attract those people with a sports application here. This one's about 12 minutes. They're both about 15-minute videos. I link them, but I don't ever show the whole thing in class, usually just the start and where I've picked out a good segment to skip to here.
Baseball is the most attended sport in the world. 75 million people a year going to games. And I think in America, it's a family heirloom.
In 10 years, you can generate more possible schedule solutions than there are atoms in the universe. It should be noted that MLB has used a husband and wife team named Henry and Holly Stevenson to create their schedules for 2 decades. Their ability to create playable schedules without apparently using advanced combinatorial optimization software is quite amazing.
Advanced combinatorial optimization. Yeah, that's what this course is. So they weren't intimidated already. Make it sound even worse. So there's actually a team, Carnegie Mellon, that took over scheduling.
In 2013, using a computer-generated schedule, the Yankees finished their season in Houston. So you have Mariano Rivera finishing this unbelievable career in Minute Maid Ballpark. It probably isn't the way that people would want it drawn up when you're talking about telling a story.
I have to say that I did kind of resent the computers coming in because they're not artwork. You know, whatever they are. But I have no idea how you would use advanced combinatorial optimization software to create a schedule.
Play Archie, play the house.
So you might have noticed in that video, I was talking over it, but they put up a little text about how that husband and wife team eventually got fired, but they competed against the computer for like 5 years, and they actually kept beating the computers. So the computers took a while before they took over, and then now there's another firm. So there's actually 2 competing firms that compete for that business. But the word that I kind of objected to that I didn't mention when we saw it on the screen was random. So they talk about these random schedules. They're not random, right? And there's, to me, some beauty that's in the computer modeling, not just in the sheets that she was doing by hand there in her book, her little workbook. You can think of a spreadsheet as just a computerized version of that little workbook that she had. Anyway, so I don't talk about this in class, but it's in my Canvas page. They can go read my retorts to this, that the schedule's not random. And the fact that Mariano Rivera was in Houston, well, that was a constraint maybe no one realized. So even the husband and wife team probably wouldn't have made that happen either. So that's just a constraint. If you want it to happen, you need to tell us, right? So I don't think that was necessarily a fault of the computer or whoever modeled that season. Plus I think he's a reliever, so he doesn't pitch on schedule, comes in when they want him or when they need him. So the fact he pitched that day was random, right? So how can you plan for that necessarily? Anyway, so I think computer modeling can be an art form as well. It's just a computerized version of what she's doing there with a pad and pencil and probably a lot of erasing. Anyway, so that's the video I usually will show either in the first day of class or maybe 3 or 4 weeks into the semester. And then depending on the semester, I will talk about some sports applications that I've developed. I spent one spring break back in like 2005 developing a March Madness solver. Been using it ever since and doing pretty well sometimes in the tournaments. I'm the reigning champion from 2019 in the College of Business pool that we had. My son came in second. He doesn't use any of this stuff. He just uses his brain. So if we could marry those two, I always tell my son, he'll be taking this course next fall. Maybe he'll now be able to use his football brain along with his spreadsheet skills and really clean up. But in the fall, I'll talk about like fantasy football. I'll simulate the Cleveland Browns. I have some of these, I guess, on the next slide. Here's my fantasy football problem. This is just made up data. This is actually an exam problem that I give students for like trying to select a set of wide receivers. You have to pick 3 each week. You can only use a player once over the remaining 5 weeks. So it's kind of, who do I pick based on the strength of the numbers there. I came in once in like spring of 2000, this is like 2008. My son was 7 or 8 years old playing soccer here in Perrysburg. And I noticed in their 6-team league, they're playing 6 games. So that means they're playing their 5 opponents once, and then they'd have 1 opponent they'd have to play twice. But his schedule, they had a team that were playing 3 times, and there was another team that they weren't playing at all. And I thought, who made this stupid schedule? And I kind of noticed partly because the team we weren't playing had a friend of his on there, and also the team we were losing to that day, we had to play 3 times, and they were just kicking our butt every time, getting smoked. So I was like, who made this stupid schedule? I came in the next day and slapped that onto the overhead projector, which I guess we still have maybe in some classrooms. And we were like, we're going to fix that schedule. Did some work with OI in recent years, a couple of years ago, and there we talk about fixed charge modeling. So there's a fixed cost. So we have to model that with a binary. Do we want to pay that fixed cost? And in the application in glass production, there's a 2 or 3 day time lag when you switch colors in the glass. The chemistry there, you have to basically throw away 2 or 3 days worth of production just as too brittle. So kind of an important thing to model that significant cost. I was thinking of vaccine distribution. Herb and I just got vaccinated, so how do we distribute those? Even some work I did here in my home back in 2011 or 12, I kind of formulated a cutting stock problem there to optimize my baseboard. So occasionally I'll show these. I don't usually show some of these. ComCom assignments, I was chair of ComCom, so we have to assign people to a committee, faculty to a committee they want. Bill Sawai was the first one that came in with his preferences, so he got his first choice. But later down the list, actually the second person on the list had the same top 3 choices as Bill. She got shut out because her second choice, someone else preferred, that was their first choice. So the person that came in second actually had no assignment, which is kind of paradoxical, kind of non-intuitive. So that's the thing I'll try to point out sometimes in a project sense, that sometimes our brain, our human brain, would kind of just process that list and say, well, let's give Bill his first pick. The second person down the list, what should we give her? She came in second. It's not supposed to be based on how fast you came in. So it's just trying to make your preferences and trying to assign the best choice. So we shouldn't just sequentially go down the list. And that's what was happening when I came to the ComCom committee. This is part of Faculty Senate, if you guys don't know already. Right now they're advertising for these ComCom assignments if you want to join up for a committee. They kind of just eyeballed them and said, oh, let's give this person because it's their first choice. It was just kind of done at random. So I think the computer coding makes it a little bit more systematic and less random than just a human saying, well, let me put Bill on this committee and Jane on that committee. To me, it's a little bit more systematic and more fair. Simulations are more fun. That's what we're doing. I have to teach a simulation here in about 20 minutes. Going to talk about airline overbooking. So how do we put people on an airplane? You might have seen a couple years ago that guy being pulled off an airplane. He was screaming about he had a seat and they were taking him off. I forget the details now. So kind of sometimes current events, even when you're talking about some just business case like scheduling an airline. But usually on the first day of class, I'll show simulation as well. So we've seen the optimization things like fantasy football assignment type problem. Now we can switch to the other half of this course, which deals with randomness. And so this histogram here is really a blitzogram. When I pull up in Excel, I hit F9 and it recalculates that. So it's a picture that moves around. Same thing with my election simulation, which I use every 4 years. So I pulled that one out, I guess in 2016, and a little bit, I guess I did a little bit of that in fall of 2020 as well. Last spring, I developed a SIR model, which is a famous mathematical model for infectious diseases. So we just simulated the infection process. And if you can flatten the curve by locking everyone down, that can actually, we showed with the statistics in that video that I created last spring, that you can actually flatten the curve and prevent a lot of infections. This classroom social distancing one I made up in the summer. Ebo, I don't think he's here today, but he was telling me, you sure you want to teach live in the computer lab? I know Herb has done it, but yeah, he inspired me to make a video, make a model of the BA 2003 classroom. Here it is. And I was assuming, you know, maybe people are pretty diligent about masking up, like maybe 90%, but suppose there's like a 5% positivity rate amongst students in the class. This is the BA 2003 lab that now is defunct, but it holds 41 people. And if you have a full classroom, which I don't think was scheduled to happen, I can model those 41 people and who's masked and who's not. So 0 means they're not masked up. And we can see that maybe one person's infected that day. And do they transmit it? Well, I guess not. They're masked up, and so that's going to prevent a lot of infections. But if you hit F9, you can maybe see that that can change each day. Right, so there's 2 people infected, no transmissions yet, but occasionally we'll have some. There's one. So someone got sick because we're in this class, right? So I was like, I don't want to be in class. I'm probably infecting people if I get infected, because at the front of the classroom, I'm probably spilling out a lot of germs when I'm talking. So over the course of the semester, over 42 lectures, we have 23 infections, right? Maybe 15, maybe just 9, but I think the classroom was set up this way where they took out the middle 2 rows. And so you could still have quite a few infections, like 5 over the course of the semester. And I was proposing that if you reduce that from 27 seats down to 22, now there's no one in front of you that you're breathing on. So maybe that would cause, in fact, no infection. So I show this to students. I don't show them the details. This one's complicated. It's basically just showing them and trying to inspire them that, hey, you can use this stuff to actually model real world phenomena. There's probably a lot of simplifying assumptions I've made here, so I wouldn't publicize this, but you can actually kind of, to me, it convinced me to say, I want to stay out of that classroom, right? All right, so the last case I want to talk to, since it's a current event today, is the idea of this March Madness solver. So I have a few slides on that. If I could jump to those. Let's see, I got to run my slideshow again. Yeah, so here's what I set up many years ago, and I use this to make my pick. So again, a binary indicator, just like we saw in the simulation, indicates when something's happening. So we talk about binary decision making in this class. So this is my bracket. It doesn't look like a normal bracket, but I have the 6 rounds of the tournament. Here, it's really half of my bracket. These are the these teams. This is the teams in the Midwest part of the bracket. So that's a quarter of the bracket here, and here's the other quarter. Baylor down to Oral Roberts. I guess that's the south part of the bracket. So these are 1/2 of the bracket. That's one side of the bracket that people are filling out this week. And in red or orange, you can see my computer has picked those various teams. Illinois is supposed to win 5 games, which means they make it to the championship game and then they lose. They lose to Gonzaga, which is the other half of the bracket I'm not showing you here. I am picking an upset like Rutgers over Clemson, at least my computer model did. So if these are terrible and I need to tear up my brackets, I can blame my computer. So I don't make my picks. I let the computer make them. I always tell that a little bit facetiously because I am a human that interacts with it. This is really a tool for exploration. So I'm not really finding the answer to this madness problem. I'm basically building a tool that I can use to explore and come up with a variety of brackets and kind of look at them with a grain of salt and say, yeah, I don't like this. Let me add a constraint. But we're trying to maximize the points that are scored. So there's some points system that we multiply by these picks. And then there's a big table, a similar sized table of probabilities that I steal from the internet. So garbage in, garbage out. If those probabilities are garbage, then my picks will probably be garbage, but I can't figure out a better way to come up with those probabilities. The constraint, so this course is about constrained optimization. So we're trying to make decisions, pick my winners, but you have to follow the rules. So one rule is you can only have 1 winner per game. So here's a game between Illinois and Drexel that will occur this Friday or Saturday. You can only have 1 winner in that little game. And same thing here, there's 2 teams that are playing, only pick 1. In the second round, I guess that would be the Sunday, Monday, so about a week from today, we have only 1 survivor from that first pod of 4 teams, right? So 1 winner comes from that first 4, same thing here, same thing here. And then it's in to the next weekend. So this is about 12 or 15 days from now, we'll have a set of games where we only get 1 winner that comes from those original 8 teams. So it kind of whittles things down. So one of the constraints is only the winners can advance. So usually, well, I'll stop, and I was going to do that with you guys, but a little bit short of time, I was going to have you guys tell me what that rule looks like. How can I ensure that you don't have someone who loses and comes back? So Illinois wins, and then they can come back and win again. Drexel has lost, so they can't come back and win. I can't have a 0 and then a 1 later on. So I need to force that not to happen. A 0-0 is fine, or even a 1-0. So if someone wins their first game, but then they lose the second one, then they're out, right? So I guess if we had time, I'd show you the Kahoot that I built here. I'm not going to make you guys join because that takes too much time, and I got to go teach here in a second. But this is what I'd ask students to help me figure out what that constraint looks like. So if I play that constraint, this might not work if I try to play it. You guys need to join first. That's not going to work. Probably see the answer. No, you can't. The answer is, I should ask you, what's the answer here? How can I ensure that I don't have someone who loses and comes back? I don't want a 0 followed by a 1. So somehow comparing that first column to the second column, I want to make sure there's a rule there that says if you lose in the first round, so if you're a 0 in the first case, you can't be a 1 in the second case. So which one of these looks correct? Someone help me out here without running a Kahoot.
The one with the green check mark.
Oh, you can see the green check mark.
Yeah.
Where?
Yes, under
underneath the question. I hear.
Oh, you know what? I have this blocking. Oh, yeah. I thought you guys couldn't see that because I had this little. I had my little window. I guess you can't see it. The Zoom. Your faces were covering up the check mark. Okay. Yeah, gave it away there. So okay, I would usually ask students that. And then my follow-up question was like, do you like my artwork here? This spreadsheet. She was complaining in that video that, you know, whatever this combinatorial optimization stuff is, it's certainly not artwork. And I'm like, yeah, it is. It's beautiful. Or at least I even have colors. So all my spreadsheets always have colors. So I think this is beautiful to see. This to me is artwork. It's no different than the artwork she had in her colored pencils on her pieces of paper. So I kind of took offense to that too. I'm a little bit about style and substance. So I want it to look beautiful and be practical and useful. So this is one way of generating brackets. Of course, you know, my son does just as well with his brain. So me, if I don't know anything about basketball, I can use this and exploit that. Exploit the numbers. So sometimes there's kind of hidden insights that I could walk you through. I don't know if I want to do too much of this, but the next slide then says, okay, what do I notice about this so that we wouldn't glean from just using our human brains? Our human brains are really good at seeing patterns, but it becomes a little difficult when you have so much information going on. So this is that table of probabilities that I stole from the internet. That's the garbage. It leads to these garbage picks. And so one thing that you notice is that I forced North Carolina to win. So it doesn't have to be just what the computer says. I can come back and say, I don't like that answer. I can put my personal constraint in and say, make sure UNC wins at least the first game. Usually I have them win the last game. So I usually put a constraint that says Carolina has to win it all. The computer then figures out everything else about my bracket, but I want that to be the end result. Here I might just say, let's make sure they win one game, maybe two. They're not that strong this year. They're supposed to lose to Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a 54% chance of winning. But I may say, yeah, close enough. I'm gonna force UNC to win. So I do tell students it's not just about finding an answer to a word problem. You can build a model and then change it. No one says I can't put that constraint in there. I can force that to happen if I want to. But then you see strange behavior like Texas Tech is actually stronger than Arkansas, but they were a 6 seed and Arkansas seeded a lot higher. So Texas Tech kind of got screwed. They were underseeded. So they have a tougher road to go. You might say, well, they're a relatively strong team. I should pick them. In fact, I do. I picked them to beat Arkansas. But it's actually counterintuitive because they have a harder first game because they were underseeded. They have to play a tougher opponent in the first game. Their chance of actually making it is actually worse than the weaker team. So these kind of hidden kind of consequences of one action like being underseeded and how it can influence how that can create unseen circumstances. Our human brains aren't necessarily good at seeing. Maybe if you see it, you say, okay, that's something I now have as knowledge. I can kind of look for that. But it's kind of hard to look with the sea of probabilities of things like that happening. So I do try to emphasize sometimes it's kind of like data mining. We're, as humans, pretty good at pattern recognition, but sometimes you're not able to see arbitrage opportunities like this of trying to find some hidden insights where a pick seems to make sense. One of these picks really doesn't to me. I can't figure out why my model's forcing Houston to lose in the third game, even though they're one of the strongest 2 seeds. My model says you can't have all the 2 seeds survive past 3 games. But why them? They're actually one of the best ones. And looking through the numbers, I can't even convince myself that that's a good decision. But I kind of trust at this point that the computer is seeing things that I can't, right? So that's something I try to emphasize to my students. So I think I'm going to stop there since I only have about 6 or 7 minutes to get to class, but I have some time to take any questions. That's really what I wanted to show for today. Anyway, here's the overall, here's the garbage. If you're picking your bracket, Gonzaga, Illinois, that's I think what everyone's picking. Those are the top 2 teams. Pretty dominant this year.
I have a question.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, Donna.
Yeah,
go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I open it up for questions. So Trent?
So I love this idea that you consistently sort of mimic for students how you look at the world and think about the world in light of your expertise in OR with all these examples. I'm wondering if you turn it on its side and ask the students for the higher order learning piece where you ask them to bring examples of what they've seen in their world that might sort of relate to OR, because I think that's a higher order learning and you're mimicking that for them. But I'm just curious if you ask for that kind of feedback or input more formally from students.
You might have missed it earlier. I think at the start I was mentioning how I used to have projects in this class, but then we folded in all this data mining content. So I feel like it just got squeezed out what we used to cover here. we have this new data mining component that takes like 3 or 4 weeks to discuss. Even though there's a whole course on that in the spring, 4440, we squeezed all that into BA 3800, which I was never really in favor of. This course was hard enough. It has optimization, simulation, and trees. And then we're squeezing in this new stuff. Some stuff did get cut away, but we also lost a week in the semester. So I used to go a lot slower in the second half of the semester after we're done with the first half with optimization, less homeworks on simulation and trees. And so at that point, I would ask students to do their own project, a group project, bring in an idea. I had some good ones over the years. I did this for like 15 years, right? Some good ones. Most of them were pretty bad, like, okay, how can I optimize my beer drinking at the various bars in Bowling Green? I'm like, oh, not one of these again. So usually I learned from that lesson. I would ask students to give me a draft of their idea, and I maybe veto and say, don't do that. Here, they'll do something else. A lot of students just want to maybe do something sports related. So I'd say, oh, there's this stuff that's not even taught, but it's in the book about data envelopment analysis that you can use to try to find efficiency in a process. So maybe try to find an efficient quarterback who has good quarterback stats for very little money, right? So how can I use little salary to generate good performance? So I would sometimes steer students where they'd have to learn on their own. I would help them, of course, but hey, go turn to this part of the book. It's not on our syllabus, but you can use that to do that kind of model. So sometimes I would stretch students that way to kind of take an idea, or like you said, something from their own practical experience, but how can, sometimes they don't know what they can do with it.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think
so-
teaching them to recognize that is hard, right? I mean, that's a hard skill to have
Yeah.
while they're trying to learn something new, but it is a lifelong sort of skill that can take them back to the core content that they might have forgotten, but still this idea of recognition
Yeah,
in
the
their
hardest thing
world
to
is
say
important.
about this optimization to students, this is what I experienced with projects, is that typical project, a lot of projects would be, I've collected all these baseball pitcher stats and, strikeouts, games won, blah, blah, blah. I added them all up. I put 50% weight on this. It was a weighted average. I got this weighted average and I sorted them. Here's the best pitcher. That's the person I'm going to pick. I'm like, there's no decision making there. You've just used statistics. So I always had a hard time teaching the difference between statistics and optimization. The statistics, you can boil it down to a single number and say, okay, this person's at the top of the list, or here's my favorite laptop because it blends the best use of cost and power and speed and lightness or battery life, whatever. You come up with a list and you basically just pick the top one. So I would always tell a student, well, maybe pick a team of pitchers, an all-star lineup of pitchers, where now there's a budget. It's more like a FanDuel. If you've ever played fantasy football, I haven't, but my son plays FanDuel. You have a budget. You can't just pick the top player. You have to pick a suite of players, and you have limited budget. So you end up not picking the top one because it's too expensive, right? So I do try to convey that difference still, but that was what I noticed in those kind of projects, is that typically they just want a stats project where they just kind of rate things and pick the top. There's no decision to be made. Just whoever's at the top of the list, right? Okay, everybody.
So we're about at 11.
Yeah, I got to run to class here in 2
And I
minutes.
know
So
you got to go to class. I want to thank everyone for coming. What a great
Thank you very
job.
much.
Thank you, Chris. Really
Thank you for
appreciate
coming.
it.
if you need help
And if
with
you have
brackets,
questions, you
yeah,
can
email me if
Chris.
you want help in your brackets.
Thank you.